What if I told you that some of the most jaw-dropping, mind-bending stories to ever come out of Hollywood are not the product of a screenwriter's wild imagination, but are 100% true? These are the tales so bizarre, so utterly convoluted, they sound like they were drafted by a writer on a serious caffeine bender at 3 in the morning. We're talking about real-life events that are stranger than any fiction, moments where the line between documented history and a badly written movie script gets completely blurred. This is the hidden side of Tinseltown, a place where reality often out-crazes the most ambitious summer blockbuster. Think about the last time you watched a film and thought, okay, that would never happen in real life. Now prepare to have that notion completely turned on its head. This journey is about to peel back the glittering curtain of Hollywood to reveal the truly peculiar, the downright unbelievable, and the flat-out hilarious true stories that the history books often overlook. These aren't just trivial bits of gossip. These are foundational moments, bizarre decisions, and sheer coincidences that shaped the industry and the icons we know today. It's a world where truth isn't just stranger than fiction, it's more entertaining, more shocking, and infinitely more human. So get ready, because we are about to dive headfirst into a collection of facts so wild, you'll be checking twice to make sure you're not actually watching a movie. We'll explore the secret rivalries that played out like spy thrillers, the production nightmares that defy all logic, and the personal lives of stars that are more dramatic than any character they ever portrayed. This is more than just a list of oddities. It's an invitation to see the magic and madness of Hollywood in a whole new light, to connect with the sheer ambition and chaotic creativity that built an empire of dreams. The real story of Tinseltown is waiting, and it's far more fascinating than anything you've seen on the silver screen. And of course, no dive into Hollywood's stranger-than-fiction lore would be complete without visiting the fantastical and sometimes grim urban legends that cling to our most cherished films. Perhaps the most infamous of these is the dark tale whispered about the Wizard of Oz, a story that suggests a much more tragic fate for one of its beloved Munchkins than simply following the yellow brick road. For decades, a persistent rumor has circulated that you can actually see the body of a Munchkin actor who died by suicide hanging in the background of the film's iconic forest scene. It's a macabre piece of gossip that transforms a moment of pure cinematic joy into something straight out of a horror movie, and it's a perfect example of how a shadow can fall over even the brightest of Hollywood's treasures. The myth typically points to a specific moment in the movie, as the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Dorothy first skip arm in arm down the yellow brick road, singing, "We're off to see the wizard." The camera captures a wide shot of the dark, gnarled trees in the background. If you look closely, or so the story goes, you can spot a small, still figure dangling from one of the branches. This, according to the legend, is not a prop or a trick of the light, but the tragic remains of a despondent actor. It's a shocking claim, one that has sent countless viewers scrambling for their remote controls to pause and scrutinize the scene, their view of a childhood classic forever altered. But where did this chilling idea even come from? The rumor seems to have gained significant traction in the late 1980s and 90s, spreading through emerging platforms like talk shows and early internet forums. It preyed on a perfect storm of conditions: the mysterious and often misunderstood lives of the little people performers in that era, combined with the grainy, black and white quality of older film broadcasts that could easily distort shapes and create phantom images. The human brain is hardwired to find patterns, especially familiar ones like the human form, in random visual noise, a phenomenon called pareidolia. This is why we see faces in clouds or figures in shadowy rooms. In the case of The Wizard of Oz, audiences were essentially experiencing a cinematic Rorschach test. So what is that strange shape in the trees, if not a person? The truth, as confirmed by film historians, crew members, and the studio itself, is far less sensational but fascinating in its own right. The mysterious body is actually a large, tropical bird, specifically one of the many exotic specimens that were housed in the studio's jungle soundstage. During filming, these birds, including storks and cranes, were allowed to wander freely through the artificial forest set. In the particular shot in question, one of these large birds is seen flapping its wings, and its long, dangling legs and distinctive shape, when frozen for a moment by the camera's shutter, create an uncanny silhouette that our minds can easily misinterpret as something much more sinister. It was a simple, completely innocent production artifact, a bit of unexpected wildlife caught on film. Yet, despite being thoroughly and repeatedly debunked by experts, including the film's own cast members who have called the rumor utterly ridiculous, this ghost story refuses to die. Its endurance speaks to something deeper in our relationship with classic cinema. We have a fascination with the dark side of the glamorous Hollywood golden age, a desire to uncover a hidden layer of tragedy beneath the sparkling surface. A story like this provides a forbidden thrill, a secret piece of knowledge that makes us feel like we've peered behind the curtain and seen the real Oz, with all its flaws and sorrows. It's a narrative that's simply too compelling, too perfectly dark, to be easily surrendered to the mundane truth. So this bizarre myth lives on, a testament not to a real-life tragedy, but to the incredible power of a simple visual glitch to birth a cinematic ghost story that continues to haunt one of the most joyful films ever made. But if you think a visual trick creating a ghost story is strange, wait until you hear about a piece of fiction that seemed to predict one of the most famous maritime disasters in history with an accuracy that defies all rational explanation. 14 years before the RMS Titanic met its tragic fate in the icy waters of the North Atlantic, an American author named Morgan Robertson wrote a novella titled Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan. On the surface, it was just another piece of adventure fiction, but in the cold light of hindsight, it reads less like a story and more like a chillingly precise blueprint for a catastrophe. Had not yet happened, the parallels between Robertson's fictional ship, the Titan, and the real-life Titanic are so numerous and so specific that they become almost unsettling to list. First, both vessels were proclaimed as the largest and most luxurious passenger ships of their time, and both were famously labeled as practically unsinkable. Robertson's Titan was described as 800 feet long and displacing 75,000 tons, while the Titanic measured 882 feet and displaced 66,000 tons, a remarkably close match for a fictional account written over a decade prior. Both ships were equipped with a triple-screw propeller system and could carry approximately 3,000 people, a number that eerily foreshadowed the Titanic's maximum capacity. The circumstances of their demise are where the coincidence becomes truly staggering. In the novella, the Titan, traveling at high speed on a cold April night, strikes an iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean. The collision occurs on the starboard side of the ship, just as it did with the Titanic, and most tragically of all, the Titan carried a dangerously insufficient number of lifeboats, far too few for all the souls on board. This was a direct, prophetic critique of a real-world safety oversight that would, years later, contribute to the massive loss of life in the actual disaster. It's as if Robertson had a crystal ball detailing not just the broad strokes of a shipwreck, but the very specific engineering, operational, and tragic human errors that would define the event. So how could this have happened? How does a writer seemingly predict the future with such terrifying detail? The most common theory is, of course, sheer coincidence. Proponents of this idea argue that Robertson was simply a knowledgeable writer who understood the trends in shipbuilding. At the time, there was a competitive race to build larger, faster, and more luxurious ocean liners, and the transatlantic route was the premier arena for this competition. The concept of an unsinkable ship was a popular marketing boast, and the North Atlantic was a well-known navigational hazard where icebergs were a constant threat. From this perspective, Robertson wasn't a prophet. He was just a well-informed author making logical, dramatic extrapolations based on the technology and risks of his day. Yet the sheer volume of precise details makes the coincidence argument feel, for many, a little too convenient. This has given rise to more speculative theories, including the idea of premonition or some form of unconscious psychic connection. Perhaps Robertson tapped into a collective anxiety about humanity's hubris, about our faith in technology being shattered by the unforgiving power of nature, a timeless theme that the Titanic disaster would later come to perfectly embody. The story feels less like a lucky guess and more like a narrative that had already been written somewhere in the fabric of time, waiting for reality to catch up. It's the kind of plot device you'd expect in a time travel movie where a character from the future accidentally inspires a story in the past, creating a perfect, tragic loop. Ultimately, the legacy of futility is a permanent monument to one of history's most bizarre and unresolved synchronicities. Whether you lean towards a rational explanation or something more mystical, the undeniable fact is that Morgan Robertson wrote a story that, in its key elements, was a near-perfect draft of a future headline. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable idea that sometimes the line between imagination and destiny can be as thin as the ice that brought down two legendary ships, one from the pages of a book and the other from the pages of history. Now, just when you thought Hollywood couldn't get any more surreal, consider the origin story of its most iconic blonde bombshell. The world knows Marilyn Monroe as the epitome of glamour, the woman whose billowing white dress over subway grate became a permanent symbol of 50s allure. But her journey to that moment began not on a soundstage, but in a bustling, noisy factory where she played a small, secret role in a military project that sounds like it was ripped straight from a Cold War espionage film. Before she was Marilyn, she was Norma Jean Mortensen, a young woman working at the Radio Plane Company during World War II. Her official job title was a sprayer and inspector, a position that sounds utterly ordinary. She would use an air gun to coat airplane parts with a special, viscous substance. But this wasn't just any job on the assembly line. The factory she worked in was a key contractor for the U.S. Army, and the material she was spraying was a top-secret chemical formula intended to create a new type of fire-resistant plastic for military drones. Without her knowledge, the future symbol of Hollywood glamour was directly participating in cutting-edge, government-funded chemical research. Imagine a screenwriter pitching that, a young, unknown woman, destined to become the most famous actress on the planet, spends her days handling secret polymers for the war effort. It's a premise so layered with irony and improbability that it feels completely manufactured, yet it's documented historical fact. The story takes an even more bizarre turn that solidifies its place in Hollywood lore. It was in this very factory, surrounded by the smell of chemicals and the hum of machinery, that Marilyn Monroe's legendary life in front of the camera effectively began. An Army photographer named David Conover was dispatched to the Radio Plane plant to take morale-boosting pictures of women contributing to the war effort. His lens found the young Norma Jean, covered in grime but radiating an undeniable photogenic quality. Conover's photographs of her were so striking that he reportedly encouraged her to pursue modeling, which she did, almost immediately signing with the Blue Book modeling agency. This means that the U.S. Army, in its quest to document its own secretive industrial projects, inadvertently discovered and set into motion the career of a global superstar. So we have this incredible chain of events, a secret military program, a chance encounter funded by the government, and the birth of an icon, all intertwined. It reframes her entire narrative. We often see Marilyn Monroe as a creation of the studio system, a product of Hollywood's star-making machinery, but this revelation shows that her path was also shaped by the clandestine world of military science and propaganda. She was, for a brief but crucial period, a real-life Rosie the Riveter, part of a collective effort to win a war before she was ever a pin-up girl. It adds a profound layer of depth to her persona, connecting the woman known for her vulnerability and comedic timing to the gritty, determined spirit of the home front. This duality is what makes the story so compelling and so strangely fitting. The same person who would later famously sing "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend," embodying a fantasy of materialism and charm, once contributed to the creation of military hardware. The woman who became a symbol of peacetime America's consumer culture and sexual fascination had her first break while serving her country in the most unexpected of ways. It's a juxtaposition that no screenwriter would dare invent for fear of being called unrealistic, a perfect paradox that proves once again that the true story of a Hollywood legend is often far more inventive and far more human than any fictional biopic could ever hope to be. While the story of a novelist predicting a real-life tragedy feels like a one-in-a-million fluke, the making of what would become one of the most perfectly crafted films in history was an absolute circus of indecision and improvisation. The production of Casablanca is perhaps the ultimate example of a masterpiece born not from a clear vision, but from beautiful, chaotic desperation. If you were to transpose its creation into a movie plot today, it would be a farce about a doomed production held together by sheer luck and the frantic energy of a team constantly on the verge of collapse. The truth is, nobody on set knew how the story would end, and for most of the filming, they were certain they were making a flop. The script, based on an unproduced play called Everybody Comes to Rick's, was a constant work in progress. The famed Epstein twins, Julius and Philip, along with a rotating cast of other writers, were literally rewriting scenes the night before they were shot, and sometimes even the morning of. Actors would arrive on set to find entirely new pages of dialogue waiting for them, their characters' motivations shifting on a daily basis. There was no final act locked in. The central romantic dilemma of whether Ilsa would stay with Rick or leave with Victor Laszlo remained completely unresolved in the script. This meant that Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, and Paul Henreid were essentially performing a high-wire act without a net, pouring intense emotion into scenes while having no idea where their characters' journeys would ultimately lead. This constant state of flux created a palpable atmosphere of confusion and anxiety. Ingrid Bergman, in particular, was reportedly frustrated as she had no idea which man her character was truly in love with, and this ambiguity affected how she played every single scene. She famously complained that she couldn't know how to portray her feelings for Rick or Victor if she didn't know who she would end up with. Should she look at Rick with lingering passion or at Victor with unwavering loyalty? The directors, Michael Curtiz among them, could only tell her to play it vague. Imagine the pressure on Bergman, trying to craft one of cinema's most enduring romantic performances while being completely in the dark about her character's fundamental objective. The most legendary piece of this chaos revolves around the film's iconic final scene at the foggy airport. Even as they were filming the build-up to that moment, the writers were still fiercely debating two possible endings. One version had Ilsa staying with Rick in Casablanca, a more traditional romantic conclusion. The other, the one we now know, had Rick forcing her onto the plane with Victor, sacrificing his own happiness for the greater good of the war effort. The decision was so last minute that the final pages of the script, featuring Rick's famous line, "Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship," were reportedly delivered to the set only on the very day they were filmed. The actors performed that timeless, heartbreaking farewell not as the culmination of a carefully built narrative, but as a sudden, brilliant solution to a problem that had plagued the production for its entire duration. What's truly staggering is that virtually everyone involved believed the film was a disaster in the making. They saw the disjointed script, the frantic rewrites, and the uncertain tone, and expected a critical and commercial failure. Bogart supposedly thought the dialogue was ridiculous, and the general sentiment on the Warner Bros. Lot was that the project was a mess. Yet, it was precisely this pressure cooker environment that may have forged the film's unique magic. The lack of a fixed script forced the actors to live in the moment, lending their performances a genuine, unscripted tension. Rick's world-weariness and cynical shell feel authentic because, in a way, Bogart was just as lost and improvisational as his character. The film's central theme of sacrifice and uncertain futures wasn't just in the story, it was the daily reality of its creation. So the next time you watch the flawless elegance of Casablanca, remember that you're not just seeing a classic, you're witnessing a miracle of cinematic alchemy where chaos, against all odds, crystallized into perfection. If the chaotic creation of Casablanca shows how a messy process can somehow yield a timeless classic, then the story behind the making of The Crow represents its dark, tragic inversion, a production where a cascade of preventable errors culminated in a loss so profound it feels like a script ripped from the bleakest of thrillers. The death of Brandon Lee, son of the legendary martial artist Bruce Lee, on the set of this dark fantasy film is a chapter in Hollywood history so laden with heartbreaking irony and sheer negligence that it forever changed safety protocols and left an entire industry soul-searching. Brandon wasn't just an actor playing a character who returns from the dead for vengeance. He was a rising star on the cusp of monumental fame, whose own life was cut short in a moment of unimaginable cinematic déjà vu. The scene was straightforward, a routine shot for the film's climax. His character, Eric Draven, walks into his apartment to find his friend menaced by a thug. The script called for the thug to fire a prop revolver at Draven from a distance of about 15 feet. The gun was supposed to be loaded with blank cartridges, special rounds that contain gunpowder, and a wad of paper or plastic to create the sound and flash of a gunshot, but without a projectile. On the evening of March 31st, 1993, the actor performing the scene pulled the trigger. There was a loud bang, as expected, but instead of a harmless puff of smoke, a .44 caliber bullet fragment was fired from the barrel, striking Brandon Lee in the abdomen. He was rushed to the hospital, but after 6 hours of surgery, he succumbed to his injuries. He was 28 years old, so how does a dummy weapon, an instrument of make-believe, become a lethal firearm? The answer lies in a series of chillingly careless mistakes during the production. Several days earlier, the crew had filmed a different scene that required close-ups of the very same revolver being loaded. For those shots, they needed to show the bullets in the cylinder, so they used what are called dummy rounds cartridges that have a real bullet at the tip, but no gunpowder inside. They are essentially inert props. However, the dummies used on this set were improperly made. Someone had, at some point, disassembled live rounds to create them, and in the process, the primer, the small explosive charge at the base of the cartridge that ignites the gunpowder, had not been removed from one of the dummies. This meant one of the so-called inert rounds still had a live and dangerous primer. During that earlier close-up scene, when the trigger was pulled on this dummy-laden gun, the firing pin hit that live primer. The tiny explosion was not powerful enough to propel the bullet out of the barrel, but it was just strong enough to dislodge the bullet from its brass casing and push it partway into the gun's barrel, where it became stuck, unseen. The gun was then returned to the props department without this obstruction being properly cleared or checked. Later, when it was time for the fatal scene, the props master, assuming the gun was safe, loaded it with what he believed were blank cartridges. A blank cartridge has gunpowder and a wad, but no bullet. When the actor fired, the powerful blast from the blank round acted like a piston, firing the previously lodged, real bullet fragment from the barrel with deadly force. It was a perfect storm of incompetence, a chain of errors where any single, conscientious check could have averted the entire tragedy. The layers of tragic irony here are almost too much to bear. Brandon Lee was playing a man who is murdered and then comes back from the grave, making his own death on set a morbid, unintentional parallel. Furthermore, he was the son of Bruce Lee, who had also died suddenly and tragically at a young age, a coincidence that felt like a cruel twist of fate written by a cynical god. The film's central theme of a life cut short by violence and the search for justice beyond death became painfully, horrifyingly real. The production, which had been plagued by other minor accidents and rumors of a curse, was now permanently shadowed by a real-world catastrophe that eclipsed any fictional narrative. In the aftermath, the film industry was forced to confront its sometimes cavalier attitude toward firearms safety on set. While guidelines existed, the Brandon Lee tragedy exposed gaping holes in their execution. The incident led to much stricter, universally enforced protocols. These now mandate that a qualified armorer, and no one else, must handle all firearms on set. Every single weapon must be thoroughly inspected in front of the entire crew before and after every use, with the barrel physically checked for obstructions. The line between a cold gun completely safe and a hot gun, one loaded with blanks, is now treated with absolute life-or-death seriousness. Brandon Lee's death was a watershed moment, a brutal lesson that the illusions of cinema must never compromise the safety of the people who create them. His legacy, therefore, is twofold: the promising career tragically ended, and the enduring safety standards that his death helped cement, ensuring that such a senseless, script-worthy tragedy would be far less likely to ever happen again. Yet, the story of a haunted film set or a cursed production is one thing, but what about an entire town built and owned by a corporation that feels like it's stepped right out of a speculative fiction novel? This brings us to one of the most bizarre real estate ventures in American history, the time the Walt Disney Company didn't just create a theme park, but purchased and constructed an entire, fully functioning municipality from the ground up. The town of Celebration, Florida, stands as a monument to an ambition that goes far beyond entertainment, a social experiment that often feels less like a community and more like a live-action simulation of corporate utopia, with all the eerie perfection and unsettling undertones that such a concept implies. The genesis of Celebration lies in the massive land acquisitions Walt Disney himself made in secret in Central Florida in the 1960s. While the world knows this land today as the home of Walt Disney World, the original vision was even grander. Walt dreamed of an experimental prototype community of tomorrow, or EPCOT, which was not conceived as a theme park, but as a real, working city of the future, a showcase for urban planning and new technology where actual people would live and work. After Walt's death, the company's priorities shifted toward the more straightforward theme park model we know today, but that seed of creating a perfect community never completely disappeared. It finally sprouted in the 1990s when Disney decided to use a portion of its vast Florida property to build Celebration, a town intended to be a model of neo-traditionalist living, a place that looked nostalgically to the past while promising a futuristically harmonious way of life. And on the surface, it is idyllic, almost aggressively so. The town's aesthetics are meticulously curated with strict architectural codes ensuring that every home, from its front porch to its picket fence, conforms to one of 6 approved historical styles. There are no unsightly wires or utility poles cluttering the view. Everything is buried underground. The school was designed by renowned architects. The hospital was a collaboration with major medical institutions, and the downtown boasts a pristine lake and a cinema showing first-run films. It was marketed as a return to a simpler, safer, more connected time, a place where children could ride their bikes to school and neighbors would know each other's names. It was, in essence, a physical manifestation of the Main Street USA fantasy, but one where people would actually reside full-time, not just visit on vacation. This is where the narrative takes a turn into the surreal, because the very perfection that defines Celebration is also the source of its most persistent rumors and reports of a strange, almost spectral presence. Residents and visitors alike have long spoken of an uncanny feeling that settles in, a sensation that the town is less an organic community and more a beautifully constructed set. The term often used is Stepford, a reference to the fictional town of perfectly obedient, robotic wives, and it's a comparison that feels unnervingly apt. The sense of corporate control is palpable. For years, the Homeowners Association covenants, initially established by Disney, governed everything from the precise shade of white permitted on a house to the number of days a Christmas decoration could remain displayed. This created an environment where individuality felt subtly discouraged, and a constant, low-level anxiety about breaking an unknown rule began to feel like the town's true haunting. The haunting, then, isn't one of ghosts in the traditional sense, but of an idea, the specter of absolute control. It's the feeling of being a permanent resident in a world where every element of your environment, from the curvature of the sidewalks to the approved species of trees, has been master-planned for your supposed benefit. This manufactured reality generates stories that sound like scenes from a dystopian thriller, tales of residents being politely but firmly reminded of covenant violations for having the wrong kind of mailbox or an improperly trimmed shrub, rumors of Disney employees living in the town to act as unofficial community liaisons or perhaps watchdogs, and the pervasive sense that you are always Living on someone else's property in someone else's dream, the most chilling aspect is the silence that can fall over the impeccably clean streets at night, a stillness that feels less like peace and more like the quiet of a soundstage after the actors have gone home. Celebration is a real place where real people live real lives, yet its foundational truth is that it is a corporate product, and that fundamental contradiction creates a psychological dissonance that is both fascinating and profoundly unsettling. It is a monument to the idea that utopia, when delivered as a branded package, can feel strangely like a very beautiful, very friendly prison. If you thought being haunted by a role was just a metaphor, wait until you hear about an actor whose most convincing performance landed him in a 2-decade-long battle with the U.S. government, a bureaucratic horror story so convoluted it feels like it was penned by an author specializing in absurdist fiction. This is the tale of John R. Neal, an English-born character actor who appeared in dozens of films throughout the 1930s and 40s. His most fateful role, however, wasn't a starring part, but a brief, uncredited appearance as a corpse in the 1945 horror classic The Body Snatcher, starring Boris Karloff. In a twist of irony that no screenwriter would dare overuse, playing a dead body on screen inadvertently triggered a real-world legal declaration of his own death, trapping him in a nightmare where he had to spend the next 20 years proving he was, in fact, still breathing. The mechanism of this mix-up is as simple as it is devastating. In the mid-1940s, the U.S. government was systematically collecting and compiling public records to establish the nascent Social Security system, a monumental task ripe for error. Somehow, a clerk processing information came across a record for John R. Neal, and whether through a misfiled document, a confused report from a movie studio, or a simple clerical slip, mistakenly declared that the actor had died. The exact source of the error remains shrouded in mystery, but the consequence was absolute. In the eyes of the federal government, John R. Neal was no longer a living citizen. His Social Security number was effectively voided, his ability to work legally was jeopardized, and his financial assets were frozen. Imagine the shock of discovering that the very institution meant to document your existence has officially and catastrophically erased you. What followed was a Kafkaesque odyssey that would test anyone's sanity. Neal suddenly found himself a non-person in the system. He couldn't open a bank account, secure a loan, or file his taxes. Every attempt to correct the record was met with the impenetrable logic of bureaucracy. He would present himself in person, a very much alive man, to government offices, only to be told he needed to provide proof of life. But how do you prove you are alive to a system whose foundational documents state you are dead? His driver's license, his birth certificate, even his own sworn testimony were often dismissed as insufficient or, in a cruel catch-22, invalid because they were associated with a deceased individual. He was essentially arguing with a wall of paperwork that refused to acknowledge his physical reality, a plight straight out of a dark comedy. For 2 decades, this gray area was his life. He continued to find acting work, often in minor roles, but navigating the practicalities of life was a constant struggle. Any employer trying to pay him legally would run into the problem of his invalid Social Security number. He lived in a state of financial and legal limbo, his economic life paralyzed. The psychological toll must have been immense, to be persistently disbelieved, to have your fundamental existence questioned by the very authorities designed to affirm it, creates a unique form of helplessness. He wasn't fighting a villain or a monster, he was fighting a phantom, an error code in a vast, unfeeling machine that had no protocol for correcting a mistake of this magnitude. The breakthrough, when it finally came, wasn't through a dramatic courtroom scene, but through sheer, grinding persistence and the slow churn of bureaucratic process. After 20 years of letters, visits, and appeals, the government eventually acknowledged its monumental error and reinstated John R. Neal among the living. His assets were unfrozen, his Social Security number was restored, and he could finally participate in society as a recognized person. The ordeal, however, had consumed a significant portion of his life. He lived out his remaining years in relative obscurity, his story becoming a little-known but powerful cautionary tale about the fragility of identity in the modern world and the terrifying power of a single administrative slip. Neil's real-life saga resonates because it mirrors so many themes we see in fiction: the man trapped by a case of mistaken identity, the individual crushed by an impersonal system, the struggle to assert a fundamental truth in the face of institutional absurdity. It's a plot we're familiar with from the works of authors like Franz Kafka, where the protagonist is ensnared in a nightmare of red tape from which there seems no escape. But for John R. Neal, this wasn't fiction, it was his exhausting, decades-long reality. His story serves as a haunting reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't supernatural creatures or cartoon villains, but cold, impersonal systems that can, with one tiny error, make a living man legally dead. And if you want to talk about a director shattering the established rules of filmmaking with the force of a sledgehammer, you need to look no further than Alfred Hitchcock's legendary shower scene in Psycho. Today, we're accustomed to the idea that no character is safe, but in 1960 the rules were clear. The biggest star in the movie, the one whose face was on the poster, untouchable, they were the hero, and they would see the story through to the end. Hitchcock, in a move of breathtaking audacity, decided to murder that convention in a cheap motel bathroom just 47 minutes into his film. The brutal, sudden killing of Marion Crane, played by the A-list star Janet Leigh, wasn't just a plot twist. It was a fundamental attack on the audience's sense of security, pulling the narrative rug out from under them in a way that had never been done before. For viewers at the time, it was utterly disorienting. They had spent the entire first act following Marion, empathizing with her desperate decision to steal the money and rooting for her escape. To have her violently eliminated so early was a signal that all bets were off, that in Hitchcock's world, anyone could be next. It was a narrative gamble so radical it sounds like a fictional director's power play, but it was all too real. The technical execution of the murder was just as revolutionary as the narrative shock. Hitchcock wanted to create a sensation of violent assault without ever actually showing a knife-piercing flesh, and to achieve this, he pioneered a new language of editing. Working closely with editor George Tomasini, he constructed the 45-second sequence from a staggering 78 different camera setups. The shots are incredibly brief, a staccato burst of images that flash before our eyes, a close-up of a screaming mouth, a hand clutching the shower curtain, the slashing motion of a knife, and the dark swirl of blood and water spiraling down the drain. This rapid-fire montage doesn't show a realistic killing. It forces the viewer's brain to assemble the violence themselves, making the experience far more visceral and psychologically traumatic than any explicit gore could ever be. The screeching violins of Bernard Herrmann's iconic score completed the assault on the senses, creating a symphony of terror that is forever etched into cinematic history. This editing style, now a staple of horror and action films, was born entirely in that moment, a direct result of Hitchcock's desire to break the form and find a more powerful way to make an audience feel pure, unadulterated fear. But the rule-breaking didn't stop with murder and montage. In a move that seems almost comically trivial today, but was a major point of contention with the studio censors at the time, Hitchcock insisted on including a shot of a flushing toilet. This was the first time a toilet had ever been seen, let alone heard flushing, in a mainstream American film. The production code, which governed movie content, explicitly forbade any display of what it deemed indecency, and plumbing fixtures fell squarely into that category. For Hitchcock, this wasn't just about realism, it was another calculated act of rebellion. He understood that showing something as mundane as a toilet flush would ground the film in a gritty, uncomfortable reality, breaking down another barrier of cinematic politeness. After the visceral chaos of the murder, the simple, mechanical sound of the flushing toilet is its own kind of horror, a cold, efficient, and utterly ordinary act that underscores the brutal disposal of a life. It was a small detail with a massive impact, proving that Hitchcock was willing to fight battles on every front to achieve his uncompromising vision. So why would a director at the peak of his career risk alienating his audience, enraging censors, and fundamentally altering the structure of his own film? This wasn't a tantrum, it was a master strategist recalculating the entire art of suspense. By killing Marion Crane, Hitchcock transferred the audience's anxiety onto the next person who would investigate her disappearance, which turned out to be her sister Leela and Marion's lover Sam. More importantly, it forced viewers to uncomfortably align their perspective with that of Norman Bates. After the murder, we are drawn into his world, watching him meticulously clean up the crime scene, and in a bizarre way, we almost root for him to not get caught. Hitchcock wasn't just breaking rules for the sake of it. He was dismantling the traditional protagonist-antagonist dynamic to explore a much darker, more complex psychological landscape. The shower scene in Psycho remains a landmark not just for its terror, but for its sheer cinematic courage, a moment when a director looked at the entire rulebook, decided it was inadequate, and proceeded to write a new one from scratch, forever changing what a movie could be and how deeply it could disturb us. Perhaps no film in history is as shrouded in real-world tales of terror as the 1973 horror masterpiece, The Exorcist. While the movie itself was terrifying audiences with its depiction of a young girl's demonic possession, stories began to circulate about a different kind of haunting, one that didn't stay on the screen but seemed to seep into the very production, plaguing cast and crew with a string of misfortunes so severe it was quickly dubbed The Exorcist Curse. This was more than just typical on-set difficulties. It was a cascade of bizarre accidents, personal tragedies, and destructive events that created an atmosphere of genuine fear, making many wonder if they had somehow invited a real malevolent presence by making a film about one. The narrative was irresistible. A movie about a battle between good and evil had somehow drawn the attention of the very darkness it portrayed. The list of strange occurrences is long and unsettling, starting with the set itself. The pivotal sequence where the character Father Karras throws the possessed Regan McNeil out of her bedroom window and tumbles down a long, steep flight of stone steps was filmed on a custom-built set at the Cineset Studios in Rome. During production, a mysterious and devastating fire broke out, completely destroying this elaborate and expensive staircase set. The cause was never officially determined, but the timing felt suspiciously symbolic, as if an unseen force was trying to halt the film's progress at a moment of critical exorcism. The blaze was just the beginning. Multiple crew members reported unexplained equipment failures, lights flickering for no reason, and a persistent, chilling cold that would settle over certain areas of the set, even when the heating was fully functional. These were the kind of low-level poltergeist activities that, while easy to dismiss individually, collectively created a pervasive sense of unease. The physical toll on the people involved was even more alarming and went far beyond minor inconveniences. Several key actors suffered significant, and in some cases permanent, injuries. Ellen Burstyn, who played the desperate mother Chris McNeil, severely injured her spine during the famous, violent, shaking scene. The special effects team had attached wires to her bed and yanked her backward with such force that she let out a genuine cry of pain that was kept in the final film, a real injury captured for cinematic effect. Linda Blair, the young actress at the heart of the story, endured her own physical ordeal. The harness she wore for the brutal possession scenes caused a spinal injury that required extensive surgery and led to lifelong back problems. Even the legendary actor Max von Sydow, who played the elderly Father Merrin, was not spared. He had to endure hours in a makeup chair to be aged decades, a process that was physically taxing and for some seemed to carry a metaphorical weight, as if the film was prematurely draining the life from its participants. But the most chilling elements of the alleged curse involved the deaths of people connected to the production. 9 individuals associated with the film died during or shortly after its completion. This included not only crew members, but also close relatives of the cast. Perhaps the most frequently cited tragic coincidence involves the actor Jack McGowan, a beloved Irish performer who played the film director Burke Dennings. McGowan completed his role and then, before The Exorcist was even released, died from a severe case of the flu. His character in the film is famously killed by the possessed Regan, his neck broken in a horrific death. The parallel between the actor's passing and his character's fictional demise was a detail that fueled the curse narrative for years. The connective tissue of tragedy seemed to bind the real world to the fictional one in a way that felt deliberately cruel and targeted. So, were these events the result of a supernatural curse, or simply a tragic series of coincidences? The rational explanation points to the film being an enormously complex and physically demanding production. The special effects were groundbreaking but also mechanically crude by today's standards, increasing the risk of injury. The intense subject matter and long, grueling shooting schedule, which stretched over 224 days, put everyone under immense psychological and physical strain, potentially leading to more accidents and health issues. The deaths, while tragic, can also be viewed statistically. With a large cast and crew, it is not impossible for several people to pass away from unrelated causes over a period of months. From this perspective, the curse is a classic example of apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. We see a pattern of misfortune because we are looking for one, especially when the film's subject matter so powerfully primes us to believe in the supernatural. Yet, for those who were there, the rational explanation often feels inadequate. The sheer volume and specificity of the misfortunes, combined with the eerie timing, created a collective experience that transcended simple bad luck. Many on the set, including the director William Friedkin, have spoken about a palpable, negative energy that seemed to hang over the production. It was a sentiment that went beyond normal superstition, a genuine feeling that they were brushing up against something they did not understand. The curse of the exorcist endures not because it can be proven, but because it perfectly mirrors the film's own themes. It's a real-world narrative that asks the same question the movie does: where does coincidence end and true evil begin? The power of the story lies in that ambiguity, in the unsettling possibility that in their attempt to create a story about demonic forces, the filmmakers might have accidentally invited one to the set, leaving behind a legacy of fear that is, in its own way, just as enduring as the film itself. While the series of tragic accidents and deaths formed the grim backbone of the curse legend, the day-to-day atmospheric disturbances on set were what truly convinced many involved that something unnatural was afoot. Beyond the catastrophic fire, a persistent and inexplicable chill became a constant character in the production. Crew members reported that certain areas of the soundstage, particularly the infamous bedroom set where the most intense possession sequences were filmed, would suddenly drop in temperature to a bone-deep cold, even when the studio's heating system was fully operational and other parts of the building remained warm. This wasn't just a slight draft, it was a profound, localized cold that seemed to defy logical explanation, creating an environment where the actors had to battle not just their fictional demons, but a very real, physical sensation of being in a presence that sucked the warmth from the room. The physical toll on the actors, however, moved beyond eerie atmospherics into the realm of visceral, documented harm. Ellen Burstyn's injury during the brutal bed-shaking scene is a perfect example of how the line between cinematic illusion and painful reality was violently erased. In the scene where the demon throws her character, Chris McNeil, across the room, the special effects team used a concealed harness under her nightgown attached to a powerful pulley system. On the take used in the final film, the wire was yanked with such excessive force that Burstyn was slammed into the floor with a sickening impact. Her piercing scream of genuine agony and shock was so real that director William Friedkin chose to keep it in the movie, meaning audiences are actually hearing the sound of a serious spinal injury occurring in real time. The damage was permanent, leaving Burstyn with chronic back pain for the rest of her life, a lasting souvenir from her battle with the fictional evil. Linda Blair, just 14 years old at the time, endured an even more grueling physical ordeal. To achieve the horrifying contortions and violent thrashing of her possessed character, Regan, she was strapped into a complex and unforgiving harness. The mechanical rigs were crude and powerful, and the repetitive, jarring motions required for the role wreaked havoc on her young body. The stress on her spine was immense and cumulative, leading to a severe injury that necessitated major surgery and resulted in a lifetime of back problems. The irony was cruel and inescapable. The two central female characters, a mother and daughter fighting a supernatural entity, were both permanently scarred in the process of portraying that fight, their real-world suffering mirroring the fictional torment on screen in a way that felt like a dark, cosmic joke. Then there were the apparitions. Among the most chilling and persistent rumors to emerge from the set was the repeated sighting of a mysterious, shadowy figure. Multiple crew members reported glimpsing a tall, dark form moving just at the edge of their vision, often in the corridors of the studio or near the McNeil house set. This was not a member of the cast or crew, but an unidentified presence that would vanish when directly confronted. The most haunting account involves a security guard who, while making his rounds one night, reportedly saw this same dark figure standing silently in a hallway. When he called out and received no response, he approached only for the form to dissolve into the shadows and disappear completely. These sightings were never officially explained, but they contributed powerfully to the growing sense of dread. It was as if the film's central antagonist, the demonic Pazuzu, depicted as a dark, statuesque figure in the movie, had decided to make a personal, off-camera appearance, watching over the production with malevolent interest. This collection of cold spots, serious injuries, and phantom sightings transformed the soundstage from a workplace into a place of genuine fear, creating a behind-the-scenes narrative so saturated with supernatural dread that it feels less like a historical account and more like a horror mockumentary come to life. But if a supernatural curse feels like the pinnacle of cinematic bad luck, consider a problem that was entirely of this world: a temperamental, $700,000 mechanical shark that seemed to have a personal vendetta against its creators. The production of Jaws was supposed to be a straightforward adaptation of a best-selling thriller, but it quickly devolved into a logistical nightmare, all centered on a hulking prop nicknamed Bruce. This was not a curse born of the occult, but one forged from rust, hydraulics, and the corrosive power of the Atlantic Ocean, a cascade of mechanical failures so profound they threatened to sink the entire production, and yet, in a final act of beautiful irony, ultimately forced the film to become a masterpiece. From the moment the 3 full-scale Bruce sharks were launched into the waters off Martha's Vineyard, it became clear that the film's central antagonist was not going to cooperate. These were not simple props. They were incredibly complex machines, weighing over a ton each, powered by a labyrinth of pneumatic hoses, hydraulic pistons, and electrical wiring, all controlled by a team of operators using a 12-button console. In theory, Bruce was supposed to be a terrifying marvel, capable of swimming, turning, and gnashing its fearsome teeth on command. In reality, the salt water was an immediate and devastating enemy. It corroded the electrical connections, short-circuited the control systems, and caused the pneumatic components to seize up. On its very first day of operation, one of the sharks promptly sank to the bottom of the harbor, requiring a team of divers to recover it from the murky depths. This set the tone for the entire shoot. The problems were endless and absurd. One shark's skin would plea and distort when it was lifted by a crane, ruining its menacing silhouette. Another would suddenly go limp in the middle of a crucial shot, its jaws sagging open in a comical yawn instead of a ferocious bite. The mechanisms controlling the eyes would fail, leaving the shark with a vacant, cross-eyed stare that was more goofy than terrifying. The crew spent more time repairing, repainting, and resuscitating Bruce than they did filming with him. The schedule, originally planned for 55 days, ballooned to 159. The budget skyrocketed, the atmosphere on set grew tense, with the cast floating in the water for hours on end, waiting for a machine that seemed determined to remain stubbornly inert. Steven Spielberg, a young director on only his second major feature, later described the experience as his film school, a brutal, hands-on education in everything that could possibly go wrong on a movie set. Faced with a non-functional star and a production spinning out of control, Spielberg was forced to make a radical pivot. He couldn't show the shark, so he had to make the audience feel its presence. This creative constraint became the film's greatest strength. He and editor Verna Fields began constructing the shark's appearances almost entirely through suggestion and point of view. They used the now iconic underwater dolly shots, the camera gliding just beneath the surface like a predator, its view obscured by churning water and bubbles. They deployed John Williams's simple, primal, two-note theme, a musical heartbeat that announced the shark's approach long before it was ever seen, and they relied on the raw, genuine terror of the actors, whose reactions were often fueled by the genuine frustration and fear of the chaotic production itself. When the shark does finally appear in full, horrifying view during the "you're gonna need a bigger boat" scene, the payoff is immense precisely because the audience has been made to imagine a monster far more terrifying than any mechanical prop could ever be. This was a classic example of a catastrophic production problem birthing an iconic creative solution. A lesser film would have relied on the spectacle of the shark, showing it constantly and risking the kind of mechanical awkwardness that plagued the actual Bruce. But by being forced to hide his monster, Spielberg tapped into the most powerful tool in a horror director's arsenal, the audience's own imagination. The fear of the unseen, the dread of what lurks just below the surface, is infinitely more potent than any rubber shark. The constant malfunctions of Bruce, a daily source of despair for the crew, inadvertently shaped the very language of modern blockbuster suspense. It's a story that sounds like a screenwriter's contrived plot device. A director's biggest problem magically becomes his greatest inspiration yet for Jaws. It was a hard one, expensive, and utterly true reality that transformed a potential disaster into a film that would forever change how Hollywood makes movies. While the stubborn mechanical shark was the most infamous antagonist, the chaos on the set of Jaws ran far deeper, a perfect storm of logistical and creative problems that would have broken a less determined filmmaker. The script, for one, was a living document in the most chaotic sense. Peter Benchley's best-selling novel provided the blueprint, but translating it to the screen was a daily struggle. The screenwriter, Carl Gottlieb, was actually on location for the entire shoot, frantically rewriting scenes on the fly based on what was, or more often, what wasn't, working. Dialogue was tweaked, scenes were restructured, and entire character arcs were refined while the cameras were practically rolling. This wasn't a polished Hollywood process. It was a desperate, creative scramble, with pages often being handed to the actors just moments before take, their performances infused with a genuine spontaneity born from sheer necessity. This constant state of flux, combined with the ocean's utter refusal to cooperate, caused the planned 55-day shooting schedule to spiral completely out of control, eventually stretching to a grueling 159 days. The production became a marathon of frustration. The cast and crew would be on the water for 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours a day, only to return with a handful of usable seconds of footage, if they were lucky. The weather was a fickle co-conspirator with the faulty shark. A perfectly calm sea could turn choppy and gray in minutes, ruining the visual continuity and forcing expensive, time-consuming delays. The Orca, the fishing boat at the heart of the story, was a real vessel constantly battered by real waves, and the actors Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, and Richard Dreyfuss were truly stuck on it for weeks on end, their growing, sunburned exhaustion and simmering irritability translating directly into their characters' strained relationships. At the center of this maelstrom was a 26-year-old Steven Spielberg, who later admitted he lived in constant fear of being fired. Every day was a new battle, not just against the elements and malfunctioning props, but against a soaring budget and a nervous studio. He was learning how to be a director under the most intense pressure imaginable, problem-solving in real time and making audacious, creative calls that would define his career. It was his idea, for instance, to shoot the famous opening scene from the shark's point of view, a decision that immediately established the monster's ominous presence without ever showing it. He also encouraged the improvisation that led to the film's most iconic line. Roy Scheider, seeing the malfunctioning shark lurch out of the water in a rare moment of operation, ad-libbed the stunned reaction, "You're gonna need a bigger boat." It was a moment of pure, unscripted genius that captured the entire theme of the film, born directly from the shared, weary humor of a crew facing down a seemingly insurmountable challenge. The financial reality was just as dramatic as the on-screen action. The initial budget of $4 million ultimately ballooned to nearly $12 million, a massive overrun that had the studio executives in a state of panic. They were convinced they were bankrolling a historic flop, a cautionary tale about a young director who bit off more than he could chew. The gossip columns of the time were filled with predictions of its failure, labeling it Spielberg's folly. Yet this very adversity forged an unbreakable camaraderie and a stubborn determination to see the thing through. The crew, from the cameramen to the production assistants, became a kind of beleaguered family, united against a common enemy that was, in many ways, the film itself. They weren't just making a movie, they were surviving an ordeal, and that collective spirit of perseverance seeped into every frame. What's so beautifully ironic about this entire saga is that every single one of these catastrophic problems conspired to create a better, more enduring film. The constantly rewritten script resulted in sharper dialogue and more focused character development. The extended, miserable time at sea gave the performances a gritty, authentic weariness that no soundstage could ever replicate. And most importantly, the inability to show the shark forced Spielberg to become a master of suspense instead of a purveyor of spectacle. He had to use the language of cinema editing, music, and suggestion to terrify the audience, a technique that is far more powerful and psychologically engaging. The triumph of Jaws wasn't just a box office story, it was a creative one. It was the moment a young director, backed into a corner by a perfect storm of production nightmares, was forced to innovate, and in doing so, he didn't just save his movie, he accidentally redefined the modern summer blockbuster, proving that sometimes the most perfectly cinematic stories of triumph are the ones that happen behind the scenes, when reality is far stranger than any script. And just when you think a production can't get any more chaotic than a sinking shark or a demonic curse, consider a blockbuster that began its life with the wrong star entirely, a miscalculation so profound the filmmakers had to stop everything, throw away weeks of work, and start over from scratch. The story behind the casting of Marty McFly in Back to the Future is a legendary Hollywood gamble, a high-wire act of studio politics and creative desperation that sounds like a movie plot in itself. The film we know and love nearly starred Eric Stoltz, an incredibly talented and serious dramatic actor, in the lead role. The director, Robert Zemeckis, and the writer, Bob Gale, had always envisioned Michael J. Fox for the part, but there was one enormous obstacle. Fox was the star of the hit television series Family Ties, and the show's network, NBC, refused to release him for the film schedule. Faced with a ticking clock and pressure from the studio, the filmmakers made the painful decision to move forward with their second choice, Stoltz, and principal photography began. For the first several weeks, the production rolled on, but a deep and unsettling tension began to grow on set. Eric Stoltz was a dedicated method actor, approaching the role of Marty McFly with a grounded, psychological intensity that was completely at odds with the film's lighthearted, comedic tone. He was playing the teenage Everman as a genuinely angsty, brooding character, which created a jarring disconnect with the screenplay's witty banter and Christopher Lloyd's wonderfully manic Doc Brown. The dailies, the raw, unedited footage shot each day, were becoming a source of mounting anxiety for Zemeckis and producer Steven Spielberg. They were watching their beloved sci-fi comedy transform into something much darker and more dramatic, and they knew in their gut it was wrong. Every day they continued was another day of expensive footage they feared was unusable, a multi-million-dollar mistake unfolding in real time. The breaking point came about 6 weeks into filming. The story goes that after viewing a series of particularly somber scenes, Spielberg turned to Zemeckis and delivered the verdict: they had to make a change. It was an almost unthinkable proposition. Firing your lead actor and reshooting nearly 2 months of work was a logistical and financial nightmare, a move that could easily doom the entire project. The studio, Universal, was understandably horrified at the prospect of incinerating such a huge portion of their budget, but Zemeckis and Spielberg argued that the alternative, releasing a film with the wrong tone and a miscast lead, would be an even greater financial disaster. In a breathtaking leap of faith, the studio agreed, and Eric Stoltz was let go from the production. The decision was as respectful as such a thing could be, with everyone acknowledging it was a matter of creative direction, not a reflection on Stoltz's ability, but it sent shockwaves through the crew and left a massive hole where the film's hero was supposed to be. This is where fortune finally smiled on the production. In a stroke of incredible timing, the schedule for Family Ties had loosened slightly, and Michael J. Fox suddenly became available. The filmmakers launched a secret, frantic mission to get him on board, negotiating with NBC to allow him to work punishing double duty, shooting the television show during the day and the movie all through the night. Fox, who had loved the script from the beginning, agreed immediately. The energy on set transformed overnight. Fox's natural charisma, his impeccable comic timing, and his ability to balance Marty's genuine teenage anxieties with a charming, smart alecky wit were exactly what the film had been missing. He wasn't just playing a part, he embodied it, creating an immediate, electric chemistry with Christopher Lloyd that felt authentic and effortless. The expensive, stressful recasting wasn't just a correction, it was an injection of pure, undiluted star power that perfectly captured the spirit of the 80s. The final cost of this high-stakes gamble was immense. The production had to absorb the entire salary paid to Eric Stoltz and the cost of all the scrapped footage, pushing the film's budget significantly higher. The crew was pushed to its limits, working around the clock to accommodate Fox's brutal schedule, yet every single person involved now agrees it was the only decision that could have saved the movie. Watching Michael J. Fox on screen, it's impossible to imagine anyone else as Marty McFly. His performance is the heart and soul of the film, the crucial ingredient that balances the scientific wonder with relatable human emotion. The story of the recasting is the ultimate testament to a filmmaker's conviction, a powerful reminder that the most iconic elements of our favorite films are often not born from a smooth process, but from the willingness to confront a catastrophic error, bet everything on a second chance, and in doing so, rescue a future classic from the brink of becoming a mere footnote. So with Eric Stoltz officially off the project, the monumental task of salvaging the film began. The first and most immediate hurdle was the sheer volume of work that had just been rendered unusable. The production had to completely discard roughly 6 weeks of principal photography, which represented a massive financial sinkhole. Every single scene involving Marty McFly had to be reshot from scratch, a daunting prospect that sent the schedule and budget into a tailspin. The sets, which had already been struck, had to be meticulously rebuilt, and the crew had to mentally prepare to essentially make the same movie twice. This wasn't a simple case of swapping one actor for another. It was a full-scale creative reset, an admission of a fundamental miscalculation that required everyone to dig deep and find a renewed sense of purpose under incredibly stressful circumstances. The central issue with Stoltz's performance, as noted by the filmmakers in later interviews, was a fundamental clash of artistic approaches. He was a dedicated practitioner of method acting, immersing himself in the emotional reality of a character to an intense degree. For a gritty drama, this technique can yield powerful results, but for the whimsical, comedic world of Hill Valley, it created a pervasive dissonance. Director Robert Zemeckis recalled scenes where Marty was supposed to react with wide-eyed, comedic shock to the DeLorean time machine or Doc Brown's eccentric inventions, but Stoltz would instead portray a deep, almost traumatized seriousness. In one specific instance, during the scene where George McFly is knocked out by the car, Stoltz played Marty's reaction with a profound, dramatic grief, as if he had genuinely witnessed a fatal accident rather than the slapstick, panicked energy the moment required. His performance was psychologically truthful, but it was the wrong kind of truth for a film that needed to bounce along with the buoyant energy of an 80s adventure. Into this vacuum of creative uncertainty stepped Michael J. Fox, but his arrival came with a brutal caveat. He was still the star of the highly successful television sitcom Family Ties. This created an insane logistical puzzle that pushed everyone involved to their absolute limits. Fox's life became a relentless 24-hour grind. His day would begin in the morning on the Paramount lot, where he would shoot episodes of Family Ties from 6 a.m. Often until 6 or 7 in the evening, a driver would then rush him across town to the Universal Studios backlot, where the Back to the Future crew, operating on a completely flipped schedule, was waiting for him. He would then film scenes as Marty McFly throughout the entire night, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning, catching moments of exhausted sleep in the car during the commute or in brief breaks on set. This punishing routine continued for months, a testament to Fox's incredible professionalism and sheer physical stamina. The atmosphere on the Back to the Future set at night was, by all accounts, both exhausting and electrifying. The crew, fully aware that they were part of a last-ditch effort to save the film, developed a powerful camaraderie and a shared sense of mission. They worked with incredible efficiency to maximize every minute they had with their new star. Christopher Lloyd, who was already established in his role as Doc Brown, would adjust his own famously intense method to match Fox's energy, often rehearsing lines with him in the dimly lit spaces between takes. The difference Fox made was immediate and palpable. Where Stoltz brought a brooding intensity, Fox injected a natural, effortless charm. His comedic timing was impeccable, his reactions were genuinely funny, and he possessed an everyman quality that made Marty's extraordinary situation feel relatable and exciting. He wasn't acting like a teenager, he simply was one, albeit one with a preternatural gift for delivering a punchline. This high-wire act of production inevitably led to moments of pure, sleep-deprived improvisation that ultimately became some of the film's most iconic bits. The famous scene where Marty invents rock and roll by playing Johnny B. Good at the enchantment under the sea dance was a direct result of this frantic energy. Fox, a capable guitarist, and the band had limited time to rehearse the complex performance. In the moment, Fox decided to channel the over-the-top stage antics of Jimi Hendrix and Chuck Berry, culminating in the wild leg kick and the sheepish line, "I guess you guys aren't ready for that yet." But your kids are gonna love it. That entire sequence, from the explosive performance to the deflating punchline, was born from the collaborative, anything-goes spirit of those late-night shoots. It was a moment of pure, unscripted genius that could only have happened in an environment where everyone was too tired to overthink and just trusted their instincts. The financial and emotional cost of this recasting gamble was staggering, adding millions to the film's budget and pushing the crew to the brink of exhaustion. Yet, looking back, it is universally regarded as the single most important decision in the making of Back to the Future. The film's triumphant success, becoming the highest-grossing film of 1985, vindicated the risky, costly choice completely. The story of the recasting is more than just a piece of Hollywood trivia. It is a masterclass in creative conviction. It demonstrates the immense courage required to admit a catastrophic error and the relentless drive to correct it, no matter the cost. Without that difficult, frantic decision, we would have a very different, and likely forgotten, version of the film. The chaos behind the scenes, born from a miscast actor and a brutal shooting schedule, ultimately forged the perfect storm of talent and tone that created a timeless classic, proving that sometimes the most incredible journeys to the screen are far more turbulent than the stories they tell. Now, if you think the fictional exploits of a whip-cracking archaeologist are the stuff of pure fantasy, prepare to meet the real-life adventurers whose incredible exploits were so daring, they essentially provided the blueprint for Indiana Jones himself. The character is a brilliant composite, a melting pot of the most audacious archaeologists and explorers from the early 20th century, men who ventured into uncharted territories with little more than a pistol, a pith helmet, and a bottomless well of courage. Their true stories are so packed with narrow escapes, mythical quests, and brushes with death that if you were to fictionalize them, you'd be accused of making it all up. Two figures in particular stand out as the primary inspiration: the enigmatic and doomed Percy Fawcett and the swashbuckling showman Roy Chapman Andrews. First, consider the story of Lieutenant Colonel Percy Fawcett, a British explorer whose life and ultimate disappearance reads like a tragic adventure novel penned by a romantic poet. Fawcett was absolutely convinced, based on historical documents and his own earlier expeditions, that a magnificent, ancient city, which he called Z, was hidden deep within the unexplored jungles of the Amazon basin. He wasn't just looking for a few overgrown ruins, he was searching for a sophisticated lost civilization, a concept most of his contemporaries dismissed as pure fantasy. In 1925, with funding from newspapers and scientific societies hanging on his every move, Fawcett embarked on his final, fateful expedition into the Brazilian wilderness, accompanied only by his eldest son, Jack, and Jack's best friend, Raleigh Rimmel. They were the perfect image of intrepid explorers, and then they simply vanished. The last communication was a letter Fawcett sent back with a group of native guides, stating he was on the verge of a monumental discovery and was pressing on into territory no outsider had ever entered. After that, silence. The disappearance of the Fawcett party ignited one of the most extensive and obsessive manhunts of the 20th century. Over the next decade, more than 100 explorers would plunge into the jungle in an attempt to find him, and at least 13 of them would die in the process, succumbing to disease, animal attacks, or hostile tribes. The mystery spawned countless theories: that he had found his city of Z and chosen to live there in isolation, that he had been killed by local tribes, or that he had simply been driven mad by fever and perished in the unforgiving Green Hell. For years, sensationalist tabloids would run stories of a white, bearded chief ruling over a lost tribe, a figure they claimed was Fawcett. His story captured the world's imagination because it had all the elements of classic myth: a noble quest, a hidden treasure, and a hero who never returns. He was the real-world embodiment of the obsessed academic who risks everything for a single, glorious truth, an archetype that Indiana Jones would later wear like a comfortable leather jacket. While Fawcett represented the romantic, tragic side of exploration, Roy Chapman Andrews was the other side of the coin, the dashing, charismatic, and incredibly lucky adventurer who seemed to walk straight out of a Hollywood serial. Andrews was a towering figure, both literally and figuratively, who served as the director of the American Museum of Natural History and led a series of ambitious expeditions into the Gobi Desert in the 1920s. His primary mission was to find evidence of early human ancestors, but he is most famous for an accidental, earth-shattering discovery: the first confirmed dinosaur eggs ever found by scientists. Before this moment, how dinosaurs reproduced was a matter of pure speculation. Andrews and his team provided the first physical proof, a find that made global headlines and cemented his reputation as a legendary fossil hunter. But it wasn't just his scientific discoveries that made him Indiana Jones material, it was his lifestyle and his flair for the dramatic. Andrews was a master marksman and often posed for photographs with a revolver on his hip, a necessity in the bandit-ridden regions of Mongolia and China where he worked. His caravans were massive operations involving dozens of camels and local support staff, and they were frequently ambushed. He recounted battles with armed brigands, surviving sandstorms that buried his camps, and navigating political intrigue in a region teetering on the edge of revolution. In one particularly harrowing incident, his entire expedition was nearly wiped out when they were caught between warring factions. He cultivated an image of the fearless, resourceful scientist adventurer, a man who was as comfortable in a tuxedo at a New York gala as he was wrestling with a faulty automobile in the middle of a trackless desert. He once famously wrote, "I was born to be an explorer. I couldn't do anything else and be happy," and his entire life was a testament to that belief. The magic of the Indiana Jones character is how he perfectly blends these two very different real-life archetypes. From Fawcett, the character inherits the academic obsession, the willingness to follow a cryptic map or an ancient manuscript into the heart of danger, and the underlying theme that the greatest treasure might be knowledge itself, even if it comes at a terrible personal cost. From Andrews, Jones gets his rugged, pragmatic survival skills, his comfort with firearms and fisticuffs, his showmanship, and his incredible talent for being in the right place at the right time for a world-altering discovery. Both real men operated in an era when vast sections of the globe were still blank spaces on the map, when an explorer could genuinely believe he was the first outsider to lay eyes on a forgotten valley or a lost temple. Their lives were a constant battle against the elements, hostile wildlife, disease, and their own human limitations. They weren't just collecting artifacts, they were piecing together the story of humanity itself, one perilous expedition at a time. So the next time you watch Indiana Jones outrun a boulder or wrestle a villain on a moving tank, remember that the spirit of those incredible adventures was drawn directly from the pages of history, from men whose real-life exploits were, in many ways, even more astonishing than the fiction they inspired. If the broad strokes of these explorers' lives provided the template, the specific anecdotes from their journeys are what truly cement them as real-life action heroes. Take Roy Chapman Andrews and his almost implausible origin story. Before he was a world-renowned paleontologist, he claimed his first professional job was as a gunslinger for the American Museum of Natural History, not chasing bandits, but hunting whales. In the early 1900s, the museum needed whale skeletons for its exhibits, and the most effective way to acquire a massive, intact specimen was, brutally, to kill one. Andrews, a crack shot and a man with an almost supernatural confidence, was hired to stand on the deck of a ship and fire a specialized harpoon cannon into the creatures, a job that required nerves of steel and a stomach of iron. The image is staggering. The future inspiration for a globe-trotting archaeologist began his career on the high seas as a scientific whaler, a role so inherently dangerous and unconventional it feels like a deleted scene from his own biopic. This wasn't a one-time affair either. He reportedly processed the enormous carcasses himself on remote beaches, battling the stench and the gruesome physical labor to secure the prized bones for science, an ordeal that forged the relentless pragmatism he would later need in the Gobi Desert. Percy Fawcett's quest, meanwhile, was fueled by something far more esoteric than a simple map. His belief in the lost city of Z wasn't just an academic hypothesis, it was a near spiritual conviction, bolstered by a series of strange obsessions that would make any movie archaeologist proud. He was deeply influenced by what he called the Manuscript 512, a mysterious Portuguese document from the 1700s that described a magnificent, silver-rich metropolis hidden in the Mato Grosso region. But Fawcett didn't stop there. He was also an ardent practitioner of the psychic arts, deeply involved in the spiritualist movement that was popular in his day. He claimed to use psychometry, the ability to read an object's history through touch, to analyze his artifacts, and he often consulted with mediums and clairvoyants to guide his expeditions. He even carried a small, carved stone idol he called his good luck charm, believing it held protective powers drawn from a forgotten Atlantean civilization he theorized was connected to his lost city. This blend of hard-nosed surveying skills and outright mystical belief is a character detail so rich, so perfectly contradictory, it's the kind of trait a screenwriter would invent to make a hero more interesting. For Fawcett, the jungle was not just a physical space to be mapped, but a spiritual labyrinth to be decoded, and his ultimate disappearance feels like the inevitable conclusion of a man who had crossed the line from explorer into true believer. The dangers these men faced on a daily basis were not theoretical, they were a constant, visceral presence. Andrews's memoirs are filled with near-death experiences that read like a checklist of action movie set pieces. In the Gobi, his camps were regularly stalked by wolves, requiring sentries to maintain all-night watch with rifles at the ready. Bandits were an even greater threat. His convoy was ambushed multiple times, leading to tense standoffs and frantic shootouts where his skills as a marksman saved his life and the lives of his men. On one occasion, his entire fleet of Dodge motor cars was nearly lost when a sudden, violent sandstorm buried them to their rooftops, requiring days of back-breaking digging to free them from the desert's grip. Conversely, Fawcett's perils were of a darker, more primal nature. The Amazon was a green wall of disease, with malaria and yellow fever claiming the lives of his companions and constantly threatening his own. He documented encounters with monstrous anacondas and jaguars that stalked his party through the dense undergrowth. Most ominously, he wrote of tribes rumored to be hostile, sharing unsettling secondhand accounts of spears tipped with deadly cuirass and of other explorers who had vanished without a trace, their fate a grim warning of what could lie ahead in the uncharted territories he was so determined to penetrate. Perhaps the most bizarrely cinematic episode belonged to Andrews, involving a discovery that was both scientifically monumental and fraught with cinematic tension. After finding the first nest of dinosaur eggs, his team continued to uncover more, amassing a treasure trove that was the envy of the scientific world. The problem was they were operating in politically unstable territory, with local warlords and bandits keenly aware that the foreigners' stones were of immense value. At one point, Andrews received credible intelligence that a large, armed force was on its way to raid his camp and seize the fossils. Faced with this threat, he didn't pack up and run. Instead, he orchestrated a brilliant subterfuge. He had his men bury the vast majority of the priceless dinosaur eggs in a secret, unmarked cache deep in the desert, leaving only a few less significant specimens visible in the camp. When the potential raiders arrived, they saw nothing of great value and left empty-handed. Andrews later returned to retrieve his hidden treasure, saving one of the most important paleontological finds in history through a combination of quick thinking and sheer audacity. It's a sequence that feels ripped directly from an Indiana Jones script, the hero using his wits to protect a priceless artifact from greedy antagonists in a remote, lawless land. The cumulative weight of these anecdotes, the whale gunner, the psychic archaeologist, the desert shootouts, and the secret buried treasure paints a picture of a world where reality was every bit as thrilling as fiction. These men weren't just academics on a field trip. They were protagonists in their own high-stakes adventures, navigating a landscape where a single misstep could mean death by disease, animal, or human hand. Their lives were a series of escalating challenges that demanded not only intellectual rigor, but also physical bravery, survival instinct, and a touch of madness. Every journal entry from Fawcett, bleary with fever yet burning with conviction, and every photograph of Andrews, posing proudly next to a fossil found with a revolver on his hip, adds another layer to the legend. They lived in an era when the world still held vast, blank spaces labeled unknown, and they charged headlong into those voids, driven by a hunger for discovery that outweighed any rational fear. The reason their exploits sound like discarded sequel pitches is because they embody the pure, unfiltered spirit of adventure, a spirit that Hollywood could only hope to capture by bottling the incredible and utterly true chaos of their real lives. But just as the legend of the Exorcist curse demonstrates how a film's dark themes can weave themselves into its production history, there is perhaps no story more chillingly literal than the one surrounding the making of the classic horror film Poltergeist. For decades, a particularly macabre rumor has clung to the trilogy, a whisper so grotesque it sounds like a screenwriter's invention, that the production, in a shocking act of frugality, used real human skeletons as props. Astonishingly, this is not a myth. It is a confirmed, deeply unsettling truth. The film's producer, Frank Marshall, admitted that for the famously chaotic swimming pool scene in the first movie where the character Marty unearthed a host of slimy, skeletal remains, and for other sequences requiring skeletons, the production opted for real, medically sourced human bones instead of expensive, newly developed plastic replicas. The reason was brutally simple. It was cheaper. A real human skeleton could be rented for a few $100s, while a convincingly detailed plastic one would cost thousands. In the cold calculus of filmmaking budget management, authenticity was sacrificed for affordability, and the filmmakers, perhaps dismissive of old superstitions, brought the ultimate symbol of mortality directly onto their set. This decision, however, would soon become the dark seed from which the poltergeist curse would grow. The notion of a curse began to solidify as a string of tragic, untimely deaths struck the franchise's young cast, creating a narrative of supernatural retaliation that was as compelling as it was heartbreaking. The first and most devastating blow came with the death of Dominique Dunne, the 22-year-old actress who played the older sister, Dana Freeling. Just months after the film's release in 1982, Dunne was strangled by her ex-boyfriend in a violent domestic dispute on her own driveway. She was taken off life support 5 days later, Her murder, a shocking and senseless real-world crime, was the initial event that led many to look at the production with a new, suspicious dread. Here was a vibrant young life, brutally cut short, and the connection to the film where she had literally battled supernatural forces felt like a cruel and eerie parallel. The tragedy continued with the passing of Heather O'Rourke, the angelic-faced little girl who famously delivered the line, "They're here." Heather, who starred in all three films, became ill during the production of Poltergeist 3. What was initially misdiagnosed as the flu turned out to be an acute form of Crohn's disease, which led to septic shock. She suffered a cardiac arrest during emergency surgery and died on February 1, 1988, at the age of just 12. Her death sent shockwaves through Hollywood and the public, cementing the curse narrative for an entire generation. To lose one young star was a tragedy. To lose a second felt like a pattern, a sinister force enacting a price for the film's success. The fact that her character, Carol Ann, was the one abducted by spectral entities in the first film only deepened the sense of a grim, fictional fate mirroring a devastating reality. Another tragic figure was Julian Beck, the esteemed actor who portrayed the terrifying spectral preacher, Cain, in Poltergeist 2, The Other Side. Beck was already battling stomach cancer when he took the role, and his gaunt, emaciated appearance in the film was not a product of makeup alone, but of the disease itself. He died in September of 1985, just months after the film wrapped. While his death was from a known illness, his casting and his haunting, unforgettable performance, where he essentially played a dying man channeling a demonic entity, lent a morbid authenticity to the production that further fueled the curse rumors. Similarly, Will Sampson, the Native American actor who played the benevolent shaman Taylor and who performed a cleansing ritual on the set, also died not long after the sequel in 1987 from post-operative kidney failure. While his death was also from natural causes, his role as a spiritual counterforce to the film's evil made his passing feel like another piece of a dark puzzle falling into place. So, were these heartbreaking events the result of a supernatural curse invoked by the use of real skeletons, or simply a series of devastating coincidences? Skeptics and many involved with the films point to the rational explanations. Dominique Dunne's death was a tragic case of domestic violence, unrelated to the supernatural. Heather O'Rourke's death was a medical tragedy stemming from a misdiagnosis and a rare, catastrophic complication of a chronic illness. Julian Beck and Will Sampson were both older men who died from known health issues. From this perspective, the curse is a classic example of pattern seeking in the face of random misfortune, a narrative constructed after the fact to make sense of profound sadness. The use of real skeletons, while undeniably creepy and disrespectful by modern standards, was a semi-common, if frowned upon, practice in older Hollywood, and there is no evidence it somehow metaphysically doomed the production. Yet the emotional and symbolic weight of the story is undeniable. The filmmakers, in their effort to create a frightening movie about a family assaulted by restless spirits, inadvertently incorporated the most potent symbol of death imaginable, actual human remains. They brought tangible mortality onto a set dedicated to simulating fear, and then, in the years that followed, mortality visited the cast in a very real and relentless way. This created a powerful, almost poetic connection in the public consciousness. The curse endures not because it is logically sound, but because it resonates on a deeper, more primal level. It speaks to a universal superstition about disturbing the dead and the potential consequences of hubris. It is the story of a horror film that, through a series of uncanny and tragic events, became unable to contain its own terror, allowing it to spill over from the screen and into the real lives of those who created it, forever linking a classic of the genre with a legacy of profound and unforgettable loss. The tragic sequence began with Dominique Dunne, the vibrant 20-year-old actress who played the teenage sister, Dana Freeling. Her life was brutally cut short just 5 months after the first film's release, not by a supernatural force, but by a horrifying act of real-world violence. In October of 1982, Dunn was involved in a tumultuous breakup with her ex-boyfriend, Chef John Thomas Sweeney. The conflict reached its horrific climax in the driveway of her West Hollywood home, where Sweeney attacked her, strangling her into unconsciousness. She was rushed to the hospital and placed on life support, but after 5 days, her family made the agonizing decision to remove her from the machines. Her murder sent shockwaves through the industry, transforming the film's success into a backdrop for an unimaginable personal tragedy and planting the first dark seed of the curse in the public's mind. This initial loss was followed by a chilling series of health crises and fatalities that seemed to disproportionately target the franchise's youngest star. Heather O'Rourke, the little girl with the luminous smile who became the face of the series with her iconic line, "They're here," began to suffer from a mysterious illness during the production of Poltergeist 3. What was initially dismissed by doctors as a minor flu or a bad case of constipation was, in reality, an acute and catastrophic form of Crohn's disease. This condition led to a sudden, severe intestinal blockage that caused septic shock. On February 1, 1988, during emergency surgery to correct the problem, Heather went into cardiac arrest and could not be revived. She was only 12 years old. The public who had watched her grow up on screen was devastated. The medical misdiagnosis and her young age made the loss feel especially cruel and senseless, and for many, it was the second strike that confirmed something was terribly wrong. The fact that her character, Carol Ann, was the beacon of light constantly pulled into the darkness made her real-life fate feel like a grim, cosmic parallel. The adult cast was not spared from this wave of misfortune, with their afflictions often bizarrely mirroring their on-screen roles. Julian Beck, a highly respected stage actor, was cast as the terrifying, otherworldly cult leader Kane in Poltergeist 2, The Other Side. Beck was already in the advanced stages of stomach cancer during filming, and his gaunt, skeletal appearance was not merely a feat of makeup, but a haunting reflection of his actual physical deterioration. He channeled his pain and frailty into one of the most memorably sinister performances in horror history, essentially playing a man consumed from within. He died in September of 1985, just months after the film completed production. While his death was from a known cause, the ghastly synergy between his real-life suffering and his fictional persona as a death-obsessed spectral entity felt unnervingly profound, as if the film had somehow tapped into a real, pre-existing darkness. Similarly, Will Sampson, the renowned Native American actor who played the powerful Shaman Taylor, the spiritual counterweight to Beck's Kane, also passed away prematurely in 1987 from post-operative kidney failure following a heart and lung transplant. His role as a benevolent healer who battles the evil spirit made his own death feel like another defeat in a larger, unseen war. Beyond the fatalities, the production seemed to be a magnet for severe injuries and strange accidents, further weaving the narrative of a jinxed set. The special effects work, which was groundbreaking for its time, was also physically demanding and perilous. In the first film, the actress who played the paranormal investigator, Dr. Lesh, suffered a significant injury when a bookshelf, rigged to fall during a poltergeist frenzy, malfunctioned and struck her. The physical toll was not limited to the first installment. During the sequel, the actor who played the father, Craig T. Nelson, reportedly suffered a serious injury that required medical attention, but perhaps the most frequently cited non-fatal incident involved Jo Beth Williams, who played the mother, Diane Freeling. In the famous swimming pool scene where skeletal arms erupt from the murky water, Williams was not told that real human skeletons were being used. She later described the visceral shock and horror of grabbing onto what she believed were realistic props, only to learn she had been clutching actual, medical-grade human bones. A moment of genuine revulsion that transcended acting and cemented the film's unsettling atmosphere behind the scenes. When you lay out this pattern of events in sequence, the murder of a young actress, the tragic medical death of a child star, the cancer-related passing of a villain whose appearance echoed his real illness, the death of the spiritual hero, and a string of on-set injuries, the human desire to find a pattern, a cause for such concentrated grief, becomes overwhelming. The poltergeist curse is a powerful example of epiphania, the psychological tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated events, especially when primed by a subject as suggestive as a horror film about vengeful spirits. Yet the symbolic resonance is undeniable. The filmmakers, in their pursuit of authentic terror, made the fateful decision to use real human remains, the ultimate tangible symbols of death, as mere props. This act, whether viewed as a simple budget-saving measure or a profound disrespect, created a narrative thread that the public could not ignore. The curse endures not because it can be proven, but because it provides a tragic, poetic framework for understanding a collection of events that are, on their own, almost too painful to comprehend. It suggests that the true horror of the poltergeist films was not confined to the screen. It was the chilling possibility that, in their attempt to simulate an assault from the afterlife, the filmmakers inadvertently invited a shadow to fall over their own lives, leaving behind a legacy where the fiction of haunted houses was forever eclipsed by the reality of haunted lives. Yet, for all the talk of curses and chaotic productions, one of the most pervasive and carefully engineered fictions in Hollywood history wasn't supernatural at all. It was the meticulously crafted illusion of love, a corporate deception played out not on sound stages but in the pages of fan magazines and on the front porches of dream homes provided by the studio. This was the era of the manufactured romance, a time when studios didn't just manage their stars' careers, but their very identities, orchestrating fake relationships to fuel the box office and protect their investments. And perhaps no story exemplifies this shadowy practice more than the tragic, double-life narrative of Rock Hudson, a tale of corporate control and personal sacrifice that feels less like a gossip column and more like the plot of a deeply somber film noir. At the height of his fame in the 1950s, Rock Hudson was the ultimate male fantasy, tall, strikingly handsome, with a gentle, rugged charm that made him the object of affection for millions of women. His studio, Universal, under the ruthless management of figures like Henry Wilson, understood that this fantasy was their most valuable asset, but there was a dangerous truth that, in the deeply homophobic climate of the time, threatened to shatter that asset completely. Hudson was gay. To the studio heads, this wasn't a matter of personal identity, it was a business liability of catastrophic proportions. So they embarked on an elaborate, multi-layered campaign of deception, constructing a public persona for Hudson that was as carefully scripted as any of his films. They didn't just want him to act in movies, they needed him to act the part of the idealized, eligible heterosexual man 24 hours a day. The machinery of this deception was both sophisticated and ruthlessly simple. It began with controlling the media through a powerful, symbiotic relationship with gossip columnists like Lola Parsons and Hedda Hopper. These writers had immense influence, and the studios fed them exclusive, fabricated stories in exchange for positive coverage and a promise to suppress any damaging rumors. When a threatening whisper about Hudson's private life began to circulate, the studio would swiftly intervene, offering a different, juicier piece of manufactured news about another star as a distraction or applying direct pressure on the publisher to kill the story. The media became an unwitting accomplice, publishing fluff pieces about Hudson's dating life that were often complete fiction, painting a picture of a man perpetually in search of the right woman, all under the careful direction of the studio's publicity department. But controlling the press wasn't enough, the public needed to see proof. This led to the most cynical aspect of the ruse, the staged relationship. Hudson was periodically paired with various actresses for carefully choreographed public appearances. They would be sent on dates to popular restaurants where photographers just happened to be waiting, or photographed holding hands at premieres, their every smile and glance engineered for the cameras. Perhaps the most infamous of these arranged pairings was with the actress Phyllis Gates, a secretary at Henry Wilson's agency. In a move straight out of a corporate espionage thriller, the studio orchestrated a whirlwind courtship and a full marriage between Hudson and Gates in 1955. The wedding was a massive publicity event, effectively silencing the most persistent rumors and solidifying Hudson's manufactured image as a devoted husband. For the public, it was a fairy tale, For those involved, it was a business transaction, a strategic alliance designed to protect a multi-million-dollar brand with little regard for the profound personal cost to the two people at its center. The psychological toll of living this lie was immense and relentless. Hudson was forced to constantly monitor his behavior, his speech, and his friendships. Any spontaneous moment, any unguarded comment, could potentially expose the carefully constructed facade. He lived in a state of perpetual anxiety, knowing that his entire career, his wealth, and his public standing were predicated on a performance he could never stop giving. The man the world saw, the affable, straight-laced romantic lead, was a character, and the real Rock Hudson was forced into the shadows, his true self and genuine relationships conducted in secret, always under the threat of exposure and ruin. This internal conflict created a profound loneliness, a disconnect between the beloved public icon and the private individual who could never be truly known or loved for who he was. The entire system began to unravel in the 1980s when Hudson became one of the first major public figures to be diagnosed with AIDS. His illness and the eventual revelation that he was gay pulled back the glittering curtain on decades of Hollywood deception. The public, who had bought into the fantasy for so long, was forced to confront the grim reality of the machinery that had created it. The story was no longer about a secret love life. It was about a powerful industry that had so thoroughly commodified a human being that it dictated his identity and orchestrated his most intimate relationships for corporate gain. The fabricated romance of Rock Hudson stands as one of Hollywood's darkest and most enduring fictions, a poignant reminder that in the golden age of cinema, some of the most compelling dramas weren't on the screen, but in the lives of the stars themselves, lives that were often masterpieces of scripted illusion. While most of Hollywood's legends were built on illusion, one man operated on a principle of breathtakingly real danger, performing feats so death-defying they would give a modern stunt coordinator nightmares for a week. That man was Buster Keaton, the great stone face, a filmmaker and performer whose entire career was a continuous, real-life action movie played without a single safety net. In an era before computer-generated imagery, before sophisticated wire work, and even before reliable safety protocols, Keaton didn't just act in his comedies. He was his own stunt double, his own special effects department, and his own insurance risk, all rolled into one. His philosophy was simple and terrifying. The camera cannot lie, and for a gag to land with maximum impact, the peril had to be 100% genuine. He didn't fake falling off a moving train. He actually fell, timing his tucks and rolls with the precision of a trapeze artist to avoid being crushed beneath the wheels. Perhaps the most iconic and most frequently cited example of his audacious craft is the legendary falling house facade gag from his 1928 masterpiece, Steamboat Bill, Jr. The setup seems simple enough. Keaton's character, unconscious in a hospital bed, is caught in a massive cyclone. As he stumbles outside, the entire front wall of a two-story house tears loose and crashes down on top of him. The sheer scale of the prop was immense, weighing in at nearly 2 tons of wood and false brick. The moment of truth was a matter of inches and absolute stillness. Keaton had to stand in one exact spot, perfectly immobile, as the wall descended. The only thing saving him from being flattened was a single, open window, which was designed to frame his body as it fell around him. There was no trick photography, no green screen, and no margin for error. If he flinched, if he shifted his weight even slightly, or if the window frame was misaligned by the smallest fraction, the stunt would have been fatal. But the brilliance of the gag wasn't just the stunt itself, it was the masterful buildup and the emotional release. The entire sequence is a symphony of escalating chaos, with the cyclone tearing the town apart around him. By the time the wall falls, the audience is already on edge. Then comes the impact, a colossal crash of wood and dust, and for a split second, all we see is the solid wall. Then Keaton is revealed, standing unharmed in the window frame, his face as stoic as ever. That famous stone-faced expression wasn't just a comedic device, it was a psychological anchor. In the midst of unimaginable physical chaos, his utter lack of reaction told the audience that everything was under control, even when it very clearly was not. It's a moment of pure cinematic magic, but the magic was forged from meticulous engineering, flawless physical discipline, and a staggering amount of raw courage. His obsession with authentic danger wasn't limited to one iconic shot. Throughout his career, he continually put his body on the line for a laugh. In Sherlock, Jr., his character, a sleeping film projectionist, dreams he walks into the movie screen and is hurled through a chaotic landscape. To achieve this, Keaton actually leaped through the chest of another performer, not a cut or a trick, but a real, physically demanding stunt where he had to contort his body mid-air to hit the target perfectly. In the general, a film celebrated as one of the greatest silent comedies ever made, he performed a sequence that is still studied by stunt professionals today. He sat on the coupling rod of a moving steam locomotive directly between the massive driving wheels and had to clear a heavy wooden beam from the track just before it would have struck him. The timing was so precise that a delay of even a tenth of a second would have resulted in a catastrophic injury. He didn't just perform these stunts, he choreographed them, understanding the physics and the camera angles with the mind of a master engineer. His body was his primary special effect, and he treated it with a combination of reckless abandon and scientific calculation that has never been matched. What makes Keaton's story so compelling, beyond the sheer spectacle, is the profound commitment to his art. He wasn't a daredevil seeking thrills. He was a consummate artist who believed that real risk translated into real comedy. The laughter he elicited was clean and powerful because the audience instinctively understood that what they were witnessing was genuine. There was no safety harness, no padded landing, no digital double to take the hit. Every wince, every gasp from the viewer was earned through actual physical jeopardy. He broke his neck during the filming of Sherlock, Jr., when a torrent of water from a railroad water tank slammed him onto the tracks, and he completed several more films before even realizing the severity of the injury. That was the level of his dedication. Buster Keaton's life and work stand as a permanent monument to a unique moment in cinema where the line between filmmaker and fearless performer was completely erased, and the most unbelievable scenes in movie history were, against all odds, absolutely real. Of course, in a film filled with masterful performances and chilling moments, one scene stands out for its sheer, visceral impact, a moment so shocking it has been seared into the collective memory of cinema itself. We're talking about the infamous horse's head scene from The Godfather, where the corrupt movie producer Jack Woltz wakes up to find the severed head of his prized thoroughbred, Khartoum, in his bed with him. It's the ultimate warning from the Corleone family, a statement of absolute power and brutal consequence. And what makes the scene so profoundly unsettling, what gives it that raw, gut-level horror, is a simple, grisly fact that the audience instinctively senses. The terror on screen is not acting. It is 100% bone-chillingly real. The story behind the prop is as shocking as the scene itself. In the early 1970s, the art of hyper-realistic prosthetic effects was still in its infancy. Creating a fake horse's head that would look convincing in extreme close-up with the right texture, weight, and even the correct clouding of the eyes was a monumental technical challenge. Faced with this problem, the film's prop master, Dick Smith, a legendary figure in the industry, made a pragmatic, if utterly macabre, decision. He bypassed the silicone and foam latex altogether and went straight to the source. Through a connection, he managed to acquire a real, decapitated horse's head from a dog food company. The head was obtained from a rendering plant where animal remains were processed for various products. It was then preserved and prepared for its cinematic close-up. The logic was coldly practical. For realism and for budget, a real head was cheaper and more effective than attempting to build a perfect replica from scratch. So this wasn't a special effect, it was a piece of biological set dressing, a fragment of actual death placed right there in the actor's bed. This decision set the stage for one of the most authentic reactions ever captured on film. The actor playing Jack Woltz, the brilliant John Marley, was a seasoned performer known for his intense, naturalistic style. Director Francis Ford Coppola, in a move to elicit a truly genuine response, chose not to give Marley the full, horrifying context of what was about to happen. While Marley knew the general premise of the scene, that he would discover a horse's head in his bed, the specifics of the prop's realism were kept from him. On the day of the shoot, as he got into bed in the dark, the crew had placed the real, preserved horse's head under the covers. They waited for the camera to roll, and on Coppola's signal, they pulled back the sheets to reveal the gruesome sight right next to him. The reaction you see in the final film is not John Marley portraying terror, it is John Marley experiencing it. The blood-curdling scream that rips from his throat, the frantic, scrambling recoil, the wide-eyed, open-mouthed look of pure, unadulterated horror, all of it is completely real. He was not prepared for the weight of the head, the cold, clammy feel of the preserved flesh, the dull, lifeless gaze of the eyes, or the overwhelming, metallic smell of blood and formaldehyde that filled the air. His body and his psyche responded before his actor's training could even engage. It was a primal, instinctive scream of revulsion and fear, a moment where the carefully constructed wall between fiction and reality completely collapsed. Coppola captured lightning in a bottle, a raw human reaction that no amount of method acting could ever hope to replicate. The aftermath of the scene was almost as intense as the scene itself. Marley was reportedly deeply shaken, and rightfully so. He had been subjected to a profound psychological shock, a brutal violation of the trust that usually exists between an actor and a director. While the result was cinematic gold, the ethical implications of such a tactic are still debated. Was it a justified, if ruthless, directorial choice to achieve a moment of unparalleled authenticity? Or was it an exploitative maneuver that prioritized a shocking performance over the well-being of the performer? There are compelling arguments on both sides. What is undeniable, however, is the result. That single, authentic scream elevates the entire scene from a clever plot point to an iconic moment of cinematic terror. It grounds the operatic violence of the mafia world in a jolt of tangible, relatable horror. It's the moment the audience understands, on a visceral level, the true cost of crossing Don Corleone. The Corleone family didn't just send a message to Jack Woltz. Through the power of that real, horrifying prop and John Marley's real, horrified reaction, they sent a message directly to us, the viewers, one that we have never, ever forgotten. Yet for all the real-world stunts and behind-the-scenes secrets, some of the most enduring Hollywood legends are not about what happened during production, but about what might be secretly encoded within the film itself. And no movie has spawned a more elaborate or bizarre set of conspiracy theories than Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece of dread, The Shining. Beyond the surface story of a family descending into supernatural madness at the Overlook Hotel, a dedicated community of fans believes the film is something else entirely, a meticulously crafted, encrypted confession from Kubrick that he helped the United States government fake the Apollo 11 moon landings. This isn't just a casual observation, it's a sprawling, intricate theory that reframes the entire movie as a postmodern thriller about the greatest deception of the 20th century, with Kubrick using his cinematic genius not just to tell a story, but to unburden his soul. The supposed evidence for this theory is a rabbit hole of hidden symbols and numerical coincidences that fans have been piecing together for decades. It begins, like all good conspiracies, with a motive. The theory posits that after his work on the profoundly realistic sci-fi epic 2001, A Space Odyssey, Kubrick was the only filmmaker on Earth with the technical expertise and the meticulous eye for detail necessary to stage the moon landing footage convincingly. In exchange for his services, the government allegedly granted him unprecedented creative freedom and a massive, secret budget for his future projects, including The Shining. According to this narrative, the film became his way of coping with the guilt of this monumental lie, embedding clues throughout the story as a form of cinematic whistleblowing. One of the most frequently cited pieces of evidence is literally worn on the back of the main character's son. In several key scenes, young Danny Torrance is seen wearing a sweater emblazoned with the Apollo 11 rocket. It's a seemingly innocent detail, a piece of early 1980s children's clothing, but to conspiracy theorists, it's a glaring, intentional signal. Why would a child in a remote, snowbound hotel, a story completely disconnected from the space race, be sporting such specific iconography? They argue it's Kubrick's way of directly pointing the audience toward the true subject matter, a bold hint placed squarely on the film's most innocent character. Then there's the infamous Room 237. In the film, this is the room from which the hotel's malevolent presence seems to emanate, the place where Danny is attacked and his father, Jack, later encounters a ghostly seductress. Theorists quickly made a mathematical connection. The mean distance from Earth to the Moon is approximately 237,000 miles. The number on the door, they claim, is not random. It's a direct reference to the celestial body we allegedly never reached. This numerical synchronicity feels too perfect to be an accident, suggesting that the true horror lurking in Room 237 isn't a spectral woman, but the dark secret of a faked lunar mission. The symbolism is alleged to continue in the hotel's carpet patterns, particularly the iconic, garish design that covers the overlook's hallways. Some analysts have pointed out that the geometric shapes on the carpet bear a striking resemblance to the layout of the Apollo 11 launch site at Cape Canaveral. When Danny rides his big wheel tricycle through these corridors, he is, in this encrypted reading, tracing the path of a rocket on its launch pad. Even the film's most famous line of dialogue, "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy," is re-examined. When Jack Torrance's typed manuscript is revealed, it's just that single sentence typed over and over again. Some have speculated that the repetition and structure of the pages, when analyzed not as text but as a visual pattern, could contain coded messages or even schematic diagrams related to the alleged hoax. The visual evidence doesn't stop there. During the scene where Jack confronts his wife Wendy in the hotel's grand lobby, she defensively waves a baseball bat at him. For a single, fleeting frame, a seemingly impossible reflection appears on a nearby television set that is supposedly turned off. Pause the film at just the right moment, and the reflection appears to show a spacesuit helmet, which theorists insist is a subliminal image of an astronaut. Furthermore, in the final shot of the film, the camera slowly pushes in on a photograph from the Overlook's July 4th ball in 1921, revealing Jack Torrance standing proudly among the crowd. Conspiracy advocates ask a simple question: how could Jack be in a photograph from 60 years before the events of the film? Their answer is that this is not just a ghost story, but a clue about timeless, enduring lies. The photograph represents a fabricated history, much like the moon landing footage with Jack, and by extension, Kubrick, forever frozen as a participant in the deception. Of course, from a rational standpoint, there are countless rebuttals to this elaborate theory. The Apollo 11 sweater was a common, commercially available item in the late 70s, and Kubrick's costume department likely selected it precisely because it was ordinary. The number 237 has many potential sources. Stephen King's original novel used Room 217, but the number was changed for the film because the hotel where the exterior was shot, the Timberline Lodge, feared no one would want to stay in Room 217 after seeing the movie. The management reportedly asked Kubrick to change it, and he arbitrarily picked 237. The lunar distance of 237,000 miles is actually a rounded figure. The precise mean distance is 238,855 miles, making the connection slightly less perfect. And as for the visual clues like the carpet pattern and the television reflection, these are classic examples of pareidolia, the human tendency to see meaningful patterns in random noise. Once you are primed to look for moon landing imagery, you begin to find it everywhere, much like seeing shapes in clouds. Yet, the theory's incredible persistence speaks volumes about our relationship with Kubrick as a filmmaker and with the power of cinema itself. Kubrick was famously a perfectionist, a director known for obsessive control over every single element within the frame. It is this very reputation for meticulous detail that gives the conspiracy its plausibility. If any director were capable of weaving a secret code into his film, it would be Stanley Kubrick. The theory endures not because it is necessarily true, but because it transforms The Shining from a haunted house story into an infinite puzzle, a film that continues to generate new meanings and conversations decades after its release. It allows fans to engage with the movie on a deeper level, to become detectives searching for a hidden truth. In the end, the most compelling thing about the shining moon landing theory is not its factual accuracy, but what it reveals about our desire to find order and intention in the art we love, to believe that a genius like Kubrick was communicating with us in a language only the most dedicated could understand. It is a testament to the film's enduring power that it can support such a wild, intricate, and fascinating fiction, creating a legacy that is, in its own way, just as compelling as the film we see on the screen. But for a film that so aggressively critiqued consumer culture and corporate identity, the most deliciously ironic story of all is how it was marketed to the public. The studio faced a nearly impossible challenge. How do you sell a movie that is fundamentally about rejecting the very idea of being sold? The answer was a campaign of breathtaking audacity, a meta, subversive advertising strategy that blurred the lines between promotion and performance art, becoming so perfectly aligned with the film's anarchic spirit that it's often impossible to tell where the marketing ended and the movie began. This wasn't just about buying television spots or putting up posters. This was a full-scale, guerrilla operation designed to infiltrate the culture from the inside out, a real-world Project Mayhem that feels like a plot point directly lifted from the screenplay. The most clever and widespread part of this campaign involved the subtle, almost subliminal, seeding of the film's title into the public consciousness in the most unexpected places. Imagine this: you're about to watch a completely unrelated movie on DVD, something like The Wedding Planner or a Disney animated classic. The screen lights up with the standard FBI anti-piracy warning, a piece of content so familiar and boring that most people's brains automatically tune it out. But for a brief moment in the late 90s, if you were paying extremely close attention, you might have spotted a bizarre anomaly. Embedded within that block of legal text, right there next to the official seals and copyright information, was a single, jarring sentence that had absolutely no business being there: Fight Club. No explanation, no context, just those two words tucked away like a secret handshake. This wasn't a mistake or a hack. It was a deliberate, paid product placement inserted into the FBI warnings on DVDs distributed by 20th Century Fox. The studio had essentially weaponized its own content library, turning a universal piece of mundane legalese into a covert billboard for its most subversive film. It was a stroke of genius, forcing the film's title directly into the line of sight of captive audiences who were primed for entertainment, creating a moment of cognitive dissonance that was both confusing and deeply intriguing. This strategy of bizarre, out-of-context placement didn't stop with DVDs. The marketing team reportedly took out small, single-sentence ads in the classified sections of newspapers, again just reading "Fight Club." They printed the phrase on matchbooks and left them in dive bars and pool halls. They created a sense that this Fight Club was not just a movie, but a secret, underground thing that was bubbling up from the margins of society. This approach was designed to mimic the way real counterculture movements or illicit activities actually spread through whispers, through cryptic clues, through a sense of exclusive discovery. It made people who spotted these references feel like they were in on a secret, turning them from passive consumers into active participants in the film's mythology. They weren't being advertised to, they were being recruited. But the most controversial and legendary aspect of the campaign took this philosophy to its most dangerous, literal extreme. Stories persist, supported by accounts from those involved in the marketing effort, that the studio or agencies working on its behalf hired people to go into bars and start small, seemingly spontaneous fights. The idea was to generate real, gritty buzz, to have patrons in a dive bar witness an actual scuffle, and then hear one of the participants mutter something about "Fight Club" as they were being thrown out or breaking it up. This tactic, if true, is the ultimate expression of the film's theme, a chilling fusion of art and reality where the act of promotion itself becomes a form of real-world chaos. It's one thing to make a movie about the destructive, primal release of violence. It's another to allegedly fabricate that violence in the real world as a sales tactic. This blurred the ethical line beyond recognition, transforming the marketing team into a real-life version of Tyler Durden's Project Mayhem, creating tangible social disruption purely to fuel interest in a product that was, at its core, a critique of such manipulative, corporate-engineered realities. The sheer audacity of this campaign lies in its perfect, self-consuming irony. Fight Club is a searing indictment of a society numbed by commercialism, where men are so desperate for authentic experience that they literally beat each other senseless in basements to feel something real. Yet here was the Hollywood machine, the ultimate symbol of that consumerist system, using the very tactics of an underground rebellion to sell the rebellion itself back to the public. The studio was selling a product about the rejection of products, using anti-advertising to advertise. It was a philosophical Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail. This created a fascinating tension that the film itself arguably predicts, with Tyler Durden's underground fight clubs eventually evolving into a monolithic, branded franchise, a clear metaphor for how capitalism co-opts and commodifies any form of dissent. The real-life marketing campaign proved Tyler's point more powerfully than the film ever could. Even the idea of destroying the system could be packaged, polished, and sold for profit. Ultimately, the legacy of this campaign is that it remains one of the most brilliantly cynical and effective marketing operations in Hollywood history. It understood its audience's desire to feel smarter than the average consumer, to feel like they were rejecting the mainstream even as they participated in it. By making the marketing itself a subversive, interactive game, it disarmed criticism and built a cult following before the film even hit theaters. It's a masterclass in alignment, where the method of selling a piece of art becomes a direct extension of the art's own message, no matter how hypocritical that may seem. So the next time you watch Tyler Durden rant about the emptiness of corporate life, remember that the very movie you're watching was brought to you by a campaign that embodied the very kind of clever, manipulative engineering he so passionately rails against, creating a real-world paradox that is, in its own twisted way, far more compelling than fiction. And that, my friends, is just the tip of the iceberg. What a whirlwind journey through the looking glass into a world where documented history and sheer madness dance a tango so intricate you couldn't write it if you tried. We've witnessed cursed sets and prophetic novels, corporate-controlled love lives, and directors willing to drop a 2-ton wall on their star just to get a real laugh. We've seen masterpieces forged in the chaos of a broken shark and a rewritten script, and we've uncovered the real-life adventurers whose exploits make Indiana Jones look like he's on a casual weekend hike. Time and again, the glittering facade of Hollywood has cracked open to reveal a core of beautiful, unpredictable, and often profoundly human chaos. The ultimate takeaway from this bizarre tour is a simple but profound one. The most creative screenwriter in the world is, and always will be, reality itself. No writer's room, no matter how caffeinated or brilliant, could ever invent a story as perfectly ironic as a studio using real skeletons to save money on a horror film, only to have tragedy shadow its cast. No plot twist feels as shocking as the sudden, brutal death of a film's hero, not from a scripted villain, but from a chain of negligent errors with a prop gun. These stories resonate so deeply because they are true. They have the messy, illogical, and emotionally raw edges that only real life can provide, where things don't always tie up neatly and the heroes don't always walk away unscathed. It's a powerful reminder that the magic of cinema isn't just in the illusions it creates on screen, but in the incredible, often unbelievable, true stories that happen just out of frame. So now we want to hear from you. After diving into this treasure trove of Tinseltown's strangest secrets, what's the most mind-bending Hollywood fact that has ever stuck with you? Was it the tale of the fake moon landing confession hidden in a horror classic, or perhaps the story of an actor spending 20 years proving he wasn't dead? Or maybe there's a movie plot you've always thought was just too ridiculous, too over the top to ever happen in reality. We'd love to know what it is. Drop your favorite piece of cinematic strangeness in the comments below and join the conversation. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the secrets hiding behind the silver screen, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. There are countless more stories waiting in the wings, more hidden histories and bizarre truths about the world of cinema just begging to be uncovered. The real story of Hollywood is forever being written, and it's always far more fascinating than anything you've seen in the theaters.